Good morning, everyone, and welcome to UMass Boston and to a celebration of the life of a very, very special person in our family. On behalf of the entire community, I want to welcome all of our guests, members of the family, friends, and colleagues of Sherry Penney. I'm particularly glad that Sherry's son, Michael, and her stepdaughter, Susan Livingston, could be here to help us remember how much she meant to her family as well as to her professional community. We're gathering this morning with this wonderful group of family, friends, and colleagues to celebrate the life of a most extraordinary woman and to reflect on the legacy that she leaves behind to the UMass Boston campus, to the university system as a whole, and across the greater Boston community. And you can see the photographs of her, or you will see them shortly, circulating behind me, to remind you of all of the extraordinary events she presided over. We should acknowledge from the very beginning the beautiful relationship that Sherry and her husband, Jim Livingston, shared. Their marriage was many decades long, a vital and loving partnership that included an abiding commitment to social justice and more recently some shared writing projects, including a biography of Martha Wright and her work in the women's movement. Their untimely loss was a tragedy for everyone who knew them and for this entire campus community. We owe so much to their individual and collective contributions to UMass Boston. Unlike many of you, I had the pleasure of meeting Sherry only twice. But I will tell you that when I was first appointed as interim chancellor, she was one of the first people to reach out to welcome me. She offered to meet with me to share her expertise and advice and to extend her warm support. We had a lovely lunch together where she shared many of her insights, trials, and tribulations that all chancellors share about her work here at UMass Boston. She went out of her way to contact important business leaders in the city to introduce me to them, and they welcomed me because I came to them with her endorsement. Sherry was very proud of her work at UMass Boston, and for good reason. Her accomplishments were impressive, spanning nearly 50 years of service. Just to remind you, she was the first woman chancellor in the UMass system. She was also the longest-serving chancellor at UMass Boston for nearly 12 years. At the beginning of her tenure, Sherry was faced with one of the most severe funding crises in the university's history due to the state's economic difficulties in the late 1980s. In fact, she oversaw the university's return of funds to the state 11 times during her first 4 years as chancellor. So when we think we're having a hard time, we should remember what Sherry and her colleagues went through. In response to those budget cuts, Chancellor Penney began initiating major fundraising efforts. And despite the decline in state support, she implemented multiple research programs, doctoral programs, and oversaw a reorganization of the school's colleges. Integral to the university's recovery from that difficult time was the impressive increase in enrollment she fostered, bringing this campus to a total of more than 12,000 students, including nearly 3,000 graduate students. But what was really impressive about Chancellor Perry was her steadfast devotion to diversity, to the urban mission that has always been central to UMass Boston. Let's remember that in 1988, less than a third of the faculty here were female. By 2000, more than 41% were women. Faculty of color rose from under 13% in 1988 to 20% by the year 2000. And the university went from 1 in 12 students who were minority or female in 1988 to 1 in 3 by the year 2000. This, I think, will really stand as Chancellor Penney's most enduring accomplishment, the opening of our doors to the most deserving of the Commonwealth students. It's hard to remember a time when this building, the campus center, this hub of energy and social life, did not exist. But it was her doing that it does. The first building constructed on the campus since 1979, and we have Sherry Penney to thank for that. In addition to her role as chancellor, she also served as the interim president of the entire UMass system, the first woman, and so far the only woman, to do so. When Sherry retired in 2000 as chancellor, An endowed chair enabled her both to teach in the College of Management and to establish the Center for Collaborative Leadership. The center's signature offering, the Emerging Leaders Program, cultivated a diverse cadre of nearly 800 people over the years who, she said, are changing the face of leadership in our region. And this is why the business community remembers Sherry Penney so fondly, because she did so much to help transform business organizations in Boston and in Massachusetts more generally, by giving them new leaders from different backgrounds and encouraging their extraordinary achievements. Sherry's work earned her numerous honors. In 2013, UMass Boston conferred Professor Emerita status upon her. In conveying the award, Chancellor Motley and Provost Langley, both of whom are here today, characterized her contributions as transformative, citing her invaluable contributions to making our campus a compelling force in the sphere of public higher education. Chancellor Penney was also an accomplished author, having written several books on leadership, on women's rights, and in political history. Well, this, of course, is a very, very abbreviated summary of the lengthy legacy that Sherry Penney leaves behind. She was a true visionary. She worked tirelessly to advocate for diversity in leadership, both here at UMass Boston, in the greater Boston business community, and in the state as a whole. In serving as the first and only female president of the UMass system, she cemented her legacy as a transformative leader for the entire Commonwealth. I know I am joined in tribute to her by all of you here this morning. I'm grateful that so many important colleagues could join us, including Trustee Mary Burns, our student trustee, Kush Patel, former UMass Boston Chancellor Keith Motley, and my colleague Michael Collins, Chancellor of the UMass Medical School, our colleagues from the Board of Visitors, members of the UMass Boston business community, so many people who served on the staff, and faculty members that worked with Sherry during her entire tenure, and of course, members of our alumni community. I have no doubt at all that everyone in this room could add a personal reflection to this ceremony. I'm pleased, though, that a number of people have stepped forward to offer a few words of celebration for her extraordinary life. And I'd just like to say a few words about them now. Our first speaker shared a story very similar to Sherry. Grace Fay was the first woman to chair the UMass Board of Trustees. She was a member of the board from 1996 to 2004, including as vice chair and then chair from 2000 to 2004. Grace has served as an executive in residence and a member of the Board of Advisors at UMass Boston's College of Management, and remains an emeritus board member of the Center for Collaborative Leadership. Since 2008, Grace has served as president of Grace Fay Advisors, LLC, a company focused on nonprofit and corporate board governance issues. Jean McCormick is a proven educator and leader with decades of experience. Most recently, Jean served as president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. Before that, she served as chancellor of UMass Dartmouth for 13 years and was at the helm for the historic opening in 2010 of the UMass School of Law, the state's first public law school. During Sherry's tenure at UMass Boston, Jean served as the deputy chancellor and was appointed by Sherry as the vice chancellor for administration and finance. Ed Toomey. Ed has led an accomplished and successful career. Most recently, he was president and CEO of the New England Aquarium. Prior to that, Ed spent 15 years here at UMass Boston. He worked for Sherry during her tenure as chancellor and interim president, having served in several positions, including as associate chancellor. Mr. Toomey was president of Holy Cross Abbey in Colorado, vice president of Gonzaga University, vice president at Lesley University, and provost of the Boston Architectural College. He was appointed by Mayor Kevin White as the vice president of the Boston Committee, a group organized to combat racism in Boston. Hubie Jones. Hubie is an esteemed community leader. He's credited with having helped to shape and define the civic and social landscape of Boston for more than 45 years. Hubie Jones served as the dean of the School of Social Work at Boston University from 1977 to 1993. Dean Jones was the first African American to serve in this capacity. He has also served as the Whitney M. Young Jr. Community Fellow at MIT and an associate professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, also at MIT. In 1995, Sherry appointed Dean Jones as the special assistant to the chancellor for urban affairs at UMass Boston. After leaving UMass Boston in 2002, Hubie founded the Boston Children's Chorus, consisting of 80 young people from diverse ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds. He is a former board chair of the Center for Collaborative Leadership, where he continued to work closely with Sherry to change the face of leadership in our region. With those introductory words, I'm now pleased to turn today's program over to our distinguished speakers and invite Grace Fay to please come to the podium to begin. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I guess I don't think I need to stand up. Maybe I should. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to share a few recollections of a wonderful woman who broke through barriers to become the first female chancellor of UMass Boston and interim president of the UMass system, Sherry Penney. Before sharing my own recollections, I wanted to be sure to pass along condolences from UMass President Marty Meehan, who had an immovable out-of-state commitment today. He told me that he, the president's office, and the board of UMass all wanted to express their profound sadness at the loss of Sherry and her husband and collaborator, Jim Livingston. He remembered Sherry to me as an expert in leadership, who, he said, both studied and demonstrated the benefit of women in leadership roles. I had several opportunities to work closely with Sherry, and I admired so her mental toughness and pioneering spirit, which was very necessary to achieve what she did, but also her warmth and very gracious manner. Sherry always said what she thought, no beating around the bush, but she also was always open to others' ideas and, moreover, encouraged the input of others. As a fellow board member for the Center for Collaborative Leadership, which Sherry founded, I got to see how she could take a vision, in this case building young leaders, and turn it into reality. The center is thriving all these years later. Hubie can talk a little bit about that in more detail. Sherry and I also served on the board of the Massachusetts Women's Forum. Sherry was focused on creating leadership opportunities. Being part of the forum enabled her to support that goal, and as a result, she got to see many women advance, some taking on extraordinary leadership roles. Perhaps the fondest, and maybe fondest isn't the greatest word here, I have with Sherry are those from the depths of the Great Recession. In 2008, we both served on the board of the Educational Resource Institute, or TERI. This organization had a noble cause, helping underprivileged students finance their education. Loans made to students were ultimately securitized. Is this all sounding familiar? Just like the home mortgage loans of that time. The result of that securitization, just like in the mortgage market, TERI came crashing back to earth, ultimately entering into bankruptcy. There's nothing like bankruptcy to bring people closer together. And it almost brought its banking affiliate, First Marblehead, along with it. Sherry and I shepherded the organization through its bankruptcy, and ultimately, 4 years later, the successful merger with Sallie Mae. It was so great getting to see Sherry operate in her usual straightforward, direct way, wrapping her arms around a problem and devising a solution that could work. She was able to do that in her day job running UMass, both the Boston campus and later the system. I can tell you from personal experience chairing the board of UMass that running a college campus, I don't need to tell anyone here this, running a college campus or university system is entirely unpredictable. Sherry always rolled right along with the punches and managed to raise the academic excellence of UMass Boston, creating new policy-focused centers. She never got flustered, Rather, she let single-minded determination move the organization forward and ensured attainment of goals. Sherry, like many great leaders, was also tireless. She drew from an inner well of energy, and when others were ready to throw their hands up, Sherry bore down on the task at hand. Her death was a tragedy and created a terrible void. To be here today and hear the stories of so many people who moved ahead in their lives because of Sherry is inspiring as it is therapeutic. We miss you, Sherry, and we love you. Thank you.
I don't think I need that. Good morning, I'm Jean McCormick, and I'm always happy to come home to UMass Boston, to Dorchester, where I grew up, and to an institution where I spent 20 years of my career, and who I have to say, whose mission and values and commitment to inclusion, I think indelibly shaped me and all that I've aspired to or accomplished in my career. But most importantly today, I'm glad to be here as Sherry's friend, her working colleague, and one of many leadership mentees. I'm here to honor an extraordinary leader that I admired and to celebrate a life spent in the pursuit of big ideals in service of all curious teachers and learners, and to recognize a woman committed to equal educational opportunity for all. I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk about how her leadership empowered me and so many others in this room, and how it shaped this institution to serve its students and its communities effectively. I met Sherry in 1988 when she became the chancellor, and I was serving as an assistant chancellor, put there by former Chancellor Robert Cargan, really to be a transition person, because I had not been a long participant in his office. I was supposed to help Sherry as she assumed her new role. I still remember her energy and her enthusiasm as she arrived, and her open, eager, curious questions about what we were hoping for and what we were worried about. No challenge seemed too big and no aspiration out of reach for this little woman. She would say to me, "Don't stand beside me, go to the other end." But she came with a unique vision for an urban research university that could be inclusive and excellent and innovative and become a model for others. She was often saying, we could become the leader as an institution. And she took on the role of the first woman chancellor with great gusto. She told us right from the beginning that she would bring new perspectives and a new way of leading, and she certainly did. Right from the start, she modeled openness, collaboration, and I would have to say, constant communication. She immediately created a working senior leadership team. She listened carefully, and she engaged the executive staff and the deans in regular weekly and monthly meetings. We met until we were tired. And she assigned us all tasks that she believed would empower us in our individual roles to shape the future for UMass Boston. I think she set us loose to dream big, but she also made us responsible and accountable. You did not come back to a meeting without doing your homework. She expected you to come to meetings prepared and to actively participate. And she was always on the lookout for those who displayed initiative and talent that went beyond their roles. She encouraged us to participate in leadership training activities, and she supported us in taking on new roles. She also wanted roles that gave us more potential to contribute than what we brought. And she loved connecting us to people outside who she felt might share our interests and enthusiasms and would expose us to new ways of doing things. Because even though we were a young institution, we did have the view that this is the way we do things at UMass Boston. She read everything that was written about changes in higher education, and she constantly shared articles and books with us. And she always had an ACE fellow with her or with a member of the team, because she thought that was a chance for us to see what was happening in other institutions around the country and to be ahead of the curve. She never wanted us to be chasing the curve. She wanted us to be ahead of the curve. She spent a lot of time getting to know faculty so she could understand their challenges and their aspirations. And she embraced a strategic goal that had already been put forward by the faculty. You'll remember this. It was that by 1995, she came in 88, we would have 9 doctoral programs and become a research doctoral university. While we might take that for granted now, in the late 80s and 90s, that was not an easy goal to achieve. She put in place the structures to support growing research at all levels, and she invested in supporting UMass Boston's rich tradition of excellent teaching. She did not want us to abandon our commitment to teaching in becoming a research university. And she did this while she was, as Grace said, constantly fundraising and building partnerships with community groups and the business community. She spent hours with students creating the vision for this campus center. I remember that Sherry was not afraid to make hard decisions, but she did so after having many perspectives on issues. And she was feisty. When Grace said she wasn't, she was feisty when she didn't agree with you. But she always invited you to make your case. And I saw new transformative ideas emerge from broad, sometimes heated, debate, healthy debate. We went places we never imagined that we could because of that. She had confidence in a collaborative way of leading, and she modeled that constantly. As Grace said, remarkably, she did this while we experienced 11 budget cuts over 5 years. I don't know how she did this, she talked me into becoming the Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance in 1989, although I did not have an MBA or a finance degree. But she said, you can figure out what you need to know, and you can master it. She said, most importantly, we need to align our resources with our goals, not change our goals because we don't have the resources. You understand the goals, Jean. Figure out the resources. And she also said to me, they don't think women know how to do this. It's one of the things that have held women back in the past. We have to prove to them that we do know how to do it. Form follows function. She said we had to do this well because we had to survive this fiscal turmoil in ways that will ultimately help this institution thrive. She brought the perspective of a historian to immediate tasks, and she did bring the determination of a person who had been limited in her own earlier opportunities, and she was not going to accept those limitations going forward. Now, there's many a story behind the story of how we balanced the budget in those years. But I will simply say it wasn't easy, and we made mistakes. I think at one point, and some of you in this room will remember it, we put out a financial plan that had something for everyone to hate. Sound familiar? But Sherry listened to feedback, and she was not afraid to adapt and find alternative paths to the same ends. She would always pick herself up and tell us, what's next? not reaching the goal is not an option. She modeled thinking creatively, and she allowed us, and in fact encouraged us, to do the same. She and I wrote an article about our experience making those budget cuts because she told me, we have a responsibility to reflect on what we learned and to pass it on to others so they won't make the same mistakes. I have to say that I'm currently serving as a trustee of Bridgewater State University, and we still have these same fiscal issues. 25 years later, we're still constrained by budgets. But Sherry taught me, and she taught many others, that about being resilient, not giving up, something I've come to know is absolutely essential to lead well. I know that having pushed myself beyond my comfort zone to become the finance person at UMB changed my opportunities for leadership. When the opportunity to become the chancellor at UMass Dartmouth presented itself, I was ready, and I had a track record of financial management that actually made me a viable candidate. And when my effort to establish a law school for UMass was at first turned down, Sherry was the first person to call me and say, "Don't give up." I tapped into those earlier lessons in being resilient to fuel the effort that was successful 5 years later in 2010. She said, "Sometimes you have to wait." All of us who work for her probably have similar experiences. I do remember that Sherry worked incredibly hard. Her days were long, and as Grace said, her reach went beyond Boston, being active in many higher education leadership groups, speaking in leadership firms on key leadership issues. She had endless energy because she wanted to make a difference. But although she worked hard, she also liked having fun. And she would plan events and celebrations of milestone achievements that would generate a sense of community and a purpose for the hard work. She certainly could make you laugh. Jim was her great love and the person who helped her balance her work and her personal life. I can remember being at their home for dinners, and when we would all get into a heated debate about the most pressing issues of the day, and Sherry would start barking orders and making suggestions about what we should do, Jim would gently remind her that she was not the chancellor of the Braintree campus, and it was time for more wine and laughter. He did make her promise that she would take time off every January and August to refresh and renew and go away with him, usually to some warm place. She always kept that promise. Jim got her undivided attention, and we all learned a valuable lesson about having a meaningful life. As sad as their passing was, I take comfort in knowing that they were together. At the memorial service this summer, we heard from Michael and others in the family about Sherry and Jim's family life with them and how that they brought joy and laughter to simple things that they shared together. The chancellor and the scientists we all knew were also just mom and dad, and that grounded them and I think made it possible to do what they did during the day. When Sherry went to serve as the president of the UMass system, I served as the interim chancellor here at UMass Boston. Sherry was very supportive, but she also told me to make my own decisions and do it in my own way. She empowered me to be my own chancellor. We obviously talked often, but when she returned to the campus a year later, she was curious about my perception of how my perceptions of leadership might have changed. Sherry always wanted to learn more about how to support other women in their leadership roles. That's probably why, when as her time as a chancellor came to an end, she was re-energized by the Emerging Leaders Program. She was curious still about how a next generation would take their place in the city and what skills they would bring. She often said to me, "I can teach a few lessons from my experience, but I can also learn more from them about new ways of doing things in a technology-enabled age." She was still the eager, energetic leader I met years ago. I last saw Sherry and Jim at a Kennedy Library event where we sat together. We joked about us both flunking retirement. She was curious about what I was doing since I left the Kennedy Institute after 3 years as president. She reminded me that you can't really retire from intellectual work. You can have a new rhythm to how you do the work, but it was always important to reflect on what we learned from our experiences. We also talked about Doris Kearns Goodwin's new book on leadership in turbulent times, and she wondered out loud whether the characteristics she outlines of these 4 great presidential leaders would be different if they were women. She was always thinking. I will miss having the opportunity to have these kinds of conversations with this remarkable woman. They always lifted me. I know that I speak for many people who Sherry worked with and mentored when I say thank you, Sherry, for believing in the power of education to change lives, for making this power real in the lessons you taught us directly, and thank you for modeling the collaborative, empowering, engaging style of leadership that you believe truly makes a difference. All of us, and UMass Boston, a strong, unique, richly diverse, urban public university that still has a vibrant teaching soul. We owe you a great deal, and we will not forget you, Sherry.
Takes me a little time to get up the steps because my legs have decided that they are 80 years old, even though the rest of me is trying to deny that. In the past, since Sherry's passing and starting at the memorial service at the Old Ship Church in Hingham, so many people have come to me individually to tell me what impact Sherry had on their life. And everybody had an individual personal story. Sherry knew something about them, and she did something about what she knew, and she made a difference in that person's life. And so you can imagine how difficult it is for me, who didn't have just one experience with her, but who spent all day, every day, for years, being with Sherry Penney. So for every impact that she had with you, and I think it's possible that that applies to everyone in this room, I was a witness to that. And so it was hard to figure, what will I say to you today? How do you put all that together? It's so hard that it's impossible to do. Jean will remember that Sherry used to tell us, and she spoke everywhere. If there was something to say about any topic, there was an opportunity in which Sherry was speaking about it. But she taught us a lesson which, frankly, we used to joke about. And she said, when you're speaking to people, this is what you do. You start out and you tell them what you're going to say. And secondly, then you say it. And thirdly, you remind them of what you just said. And you can never talk to them about more than 3 things. And so when we would be writing speeches and working, Jean and I would be kidding about it, and we'd say, do you have the 3rd thing, or do I have the 3rd thing? And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say. I'm going to say it. I'm going to remind you about it, and then we'll be over. What I want to do, from the vantage point of somebody who really lived with Sherry Penney in so many circumstances and for such a long time, I want to tell you what I think made Sherry Penney tick. And then I want to tell you about some things that she was very proud of at UMass Boston and in her life as an educator, and then we'll be through with it. I think there were 5 characteristics that Sherry had that really did make a difference to her. And the first one, if you could kind of encompass Sherry's life, not define it, because defining is itself a kind of a limiting word, and really she didn't have many limits. But if you wanted to encompass it, Sherry was a person who believed that the crowning achievement of the human person was not intellect, but will. And she understood that we're made up of both of those. We all have intellects, and we all have wills. But for her, will was the most important thing, and it makes a difference. Because she emphasized will, she looked at truth, and she looked at value in a different way. She didn't see truth or value as something to be sought, something to be discovered, and something to be embraced. She looked at the will as expressing our appreciation of the reality that we stood in, and that she understood that that reality was always becoming. And so truth for her meant, maybe because she was a historian, it meant embracing the past in a very, very active way, living in the present by making decisions about it, and then making a difference because of those decisions. Will for her had an effect on how she judged success. Will for her had an effect on how she handled criticism. Sherry was never really concerned with what she was accomplishing. She didn't list the things that she did and achieved. Sherry was always concerned about what her opportunities were to contribute. And so she was an active person from the very beginning. And she understood that if there were to be value in the world, she had to make that value happen. She had to create that value. And it really did make a difference. She didn't mind criticism because she understood that when she was facing reality, other people were facing that same reality and sometimes seeing it from a different point of view. And that she understood that if there were to be a future, and that had to be a future of value, it came from your inheriting the past and creating the future. So it had a real, almost metaphysical influence on who she was as a person. And it ran through every single aspect of her life. The second thing that really characterized Sherry was that because she had that view of an active world in which people had to be invested, in which people had to appreciate, in which people had to do, in which people had to create, she was always looking for new talent. And she appreciated that new talent. And I asked her once, I said, why do you spend so much time doing that? And she said, because I need them. Because she understood that she couldn't get it all done herself. And as I stood this morning at the door and met people coming in, it was like old home week coming back here. Somebody said this morning, it used to be that we would see each other all together at weddings and funerals. And now there are no more weddings, and so we just come to see people at funerals. But coming here today was so important, seeing people, and I recognized so many people that Sherry saw talent in, and she saw promise in, and she saw partners in, and she saw creators in. And I'm going to mention some of them. There may be some of you that I forget, but anything that happened before 8 o'clock in the morning on the day I'm talking about, I forget anyway. so it doesn't make any difference. But I look around the room and I see some people that Sherry, some of these people were her critics, as a matter of fact. But she really, really, really appreciated them. I start first and I see sitting over on the side of the room Peter Keong. And Sherry thought Peter Keong was the best thing that ever happened. And I can remember when she pushed him and pushed him and pushed him as a young faculty member to go for early tenure. Peter, you probably remember that. And she said to me once, every time I talk to him, I see Marion Wright Edelman. And if you know who Marion Wright Edelman was, somebody who was passionately dedicated to the value and education of children. And when she saw in Peter a young person who did that, I saw and I spoke to Ann Withorn. And Sherry had such a great, Ann may be surprised to hear this, but Sherry talked about Ann very often. And the reason that she did, she said, I so appreciate her courage in speaking truth to power. If there was something to be said, even if it cost Ann a little bit to do that, she would say it. And I see Paul Watanabe, and I remember when the institutes were growing and the Asian Institute was starting, and Paul came with such knowledge and such willingness to contribute that she appreciated that. And I saw also J.D. Chesloff. I don't know where J.D. is. J.D. was a young person working for Sherry in the president's office, and she said to me once, that guy has talent. And every chance that she got to advance that, she did that. And I'm looking and I'm seeing Charlie Titus. And I recall Jean saying that Sherry said to her, don't stand next to me. Sherry loved to be seen with Charlie Titus. And I said to her once, why do you do that? Don't you know it makes you look so much smaller? And she said, I don't care about that. It helps me and it helps other people to focus on his gentility. Because everybody knows that if Charlie Titus is anything, he's the soul of a gentleman. So whatever she did, and whenever she met people, and there were others in the room too, I could probably go from table to table and see people, she looked at you and she saw you as partners. I see Mary Grant, sitting there, Mary Grant, who went on to be a president herself, and is now succeeded Jean at the Ted Kennedy Institute. And when Sherry dealt with Mary, Sherry used to say, she's somebody who could take my place. So she had that sense, but she had it because she saw all these people as actors. She saw all these people as doers. She saw all these people as creators who were giving something to the world in which they lived. What made those relationships important is that Sherry trusted the people. Once she got you, Jean mentioned that too, once she involved you in something, she trusted you to do it. She wasn't looking over the shoulder of the people that she worked with all the time. She did many, many great things for UMass Boston, but she wasn't driving everybody crazy about trying to do it all herself. She did it with people because she trusted them, and that trust was reciprocated. But that stemmed from her notion that the most important thing a human being can do, is to be active, is to be creative. And when she invited you into that picture, not because she could make you valuable, but because you were valuable and she saw it, it was an important thing for her to do. And so she trusted people. The fourth thing about Sherry that I think made her a different kind of person is that Sherry had heroes. She really was a great person in herself. She was a hard worker, but she had heroes. She had people that made a difference in her life and made a difference in the lives of the worlds that they lived in. Some of those heroes are in this room. Some of them are not. To know Sherry, you would have to know what her history was when she was at Yale. When she was at Yale, talking about the status of women in education, It wasn't that she wasn't at Yale in 1973, but it wasn't until 1973 that Yale first had women on the corporation. And two of those women were Marian Wright Edelman and Hannah Gray. And those people became mentors for Sherry Penney. And let's take Marian Wright Edelman, a brilliant speaker, a brilliant writer, but what she was first and foremost was a force. She was an energy. She made things happen. And Hannah Gray understood the vitality of higher education, that it was a living being and that had to change and adjust, and she was a doer. And Sherry learned things from them. After that, she went to SUNY Plattsburgh. And by accident, really, she got there in a set of circumstances in which they needed action taking immediately, especially in fundraising, and she did it. So she came out of a world where she had real live people who were heroes to her. That meant they were recognizable leaders, they understood and were able to articulate issues, and they did something about it, they made differences, and they engaged everybody else in that difference-making. But there are also people that were her heroes who are sitting in this room this morning. Sherry was a hard worker, and she was a smart person. But she used to say to me, there's only one person who can beat me on that. And that one person was Margaret McKenna. And she'd say, Margaret's smarter than I am. Margaret works harder than I am. And she talked about it often. Margaret may not know that she talked about it, but she did. Margaret knows that she called her a lot, and Margaret knows that she sought her advice, but it's because, for her, Margaret McKenna was a hero. Another hero was Hubie Jones. When we were in our early years at UMass Boston, we had great partnership with Northeastern University, much more so than a lot of people knew. But there were a couple of people at Northeastern University. I might have said in my head St. Louis University. But at Northeastern University, there were two people that were heroes for Sherry Penney. One was Chancellor Motley. Whenever we had issues that had to do with the value of students in the educational enterprise, so often students get lost in higher education. But Sherry was committed to the fact that this institution had to make a difference, but it had to make a difference primarily to the students who were studying at it. And a leader in that, not so much because of what he said, but because of what he did, was Keith Motley. So very, very often, Sherry would call and talk to Keith Motley. So Sherry knew Keith Motley well before he became the chancellor here. And the other person was Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson was a leader in the city and in higher education on the issue of affirmative action. And when we were forming our efforts in affirmative action at UMass Boston, most of that came from Northeastern University through Alan Jackson. But they had a person at Northeastern by the name of Jim King, and he was kind of a representative of the president there. And wherever there was an issue being discussed in the urban character of Boston, Northeastern University was there in the person of Jim King, and Sherry wanted that. It happened that at the same time, Hubie Jones was available. Hubie Jones had been the dean of the School of Social Work at BU. He had been president of Roxbury Community College, and he was moving on, and Sherry said to me, go get Hubie. And she decided she wanted Hubie Jones to be the face and the voice of UMass Boston when issues were being discussed about Boston. And I think there was a little false advertising, that she said to Hubie, you come, and maybe you could only do 3 days a week, and you could be out representing UMass Boston. And then he found that she was not good at math. And that exactly, not only did 3 become 7, but Sherry thought there were 9 days in a week. So Hubie was a hero. And then another hero, I don't think it can go without saying, I think it's important that you know this. Another hero for Sherry Penney, a person that she thought about a lot, a person that she talked about a lot, a person that she trusted a lot, a person that she hoped trusted her a lot, was Jean McCormick. When Sherry was building with her team what was happening at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, not all team members were alike. And she depended in an exquisite and a necessary way on Jean McCormick. And so Sherry, Keith will tell you this, that one of the things that Sherry would tell you all the time is never, never, never forget to thank the people who were with you. That's kind of what made her what she was. And I think one of the tragedies of Sherry's untimely death was that she probably was not able to get around to saying to Jean, as much as she wanted to, how much she appreciated who she was and what she did. And so kind of on her behalf, Jean, I say that to you, and it's important to say it publicly. So it was an important thing for Sherry to have those heroes. And it made a difference to her. Again, going back to the fact that Sherry was a willful person. And Sherry liked people who made differences and who made actions. And then the last thing to say about Sherry was that she had a sense of humor. Sherry laughed a lot. She knew and she appreciated that life was awkward and that life didn't fit and that there was almost always pieces missing in the puzzle. And she thought that was funny. And so very, very often you might have been in her office or you might have been dealing with her in a particular way, and there might even have been a clash of views or something, and it would be done and over with, and we'd be sitting around talking about things at the end of the week on Friday, but mostly we'd be laughing at it. And mostly we'd be laughing at her, and mostly we'd be laughing at you. And so we had an awful lot of fun doing that. So that's who she was. She was a willful person. She was a person who recognized talent because she needed talent, not just in herself. She was a person who trusted and wanted to be trusted. She was a person who had humor, and that she was a person who had heroes. She was a person who respected what everybody else had done for the University of Massachusetts, Boston. There were a few things that Sherry did. There's been a lot of talk, and others could talk more, about what Sherry really did and what she accomplished and what she had to contribute to. And Sherry, Jean has talked very much about her commitment to research, but there are some other things that she was very, very proud of that I would just want to mention. And I think the character of research at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, was the thing that Sherry was the most proud of. But another thing was Sherry was deeply proud, very, very proud of what was going on in the honors program. And I saw Monica McAlpin and Bob Crossley come in this morning, and they will remember that Sherry took time to talk to them, and Sherry said to them, I want a good honors program. It sometimes gets lost in the list of things that Sherry did and what she wanted to do, but it was very, very, very important, Monica, that you did what you did and that Paul did what he did in developing the honors program. It was a value to her because she knew that was not the only place, but a special place in which willful people could be discovered and could be trained and could be people who were creating futures. She was very, 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 very proud of what was happening in diversity. But again, because of what her philosophical base was, diversity was not just a concept for her. It was not even an end in a sense for her. Diversity was a means to an end. Diversity was a mode of existence for Sherry. It wasn't just an idea. It was something that you did. It was something that you knew about. It was something that you related to the past. It was something that you lived in the present. And it was something that helped you create the future because you needed to, because you had to do that. Because unless you did do it, The future would not be worth as much as it could be. So she was very, very proud of that. And then, of course, she was proud of the Center for Collaborative Leadership. It was really an extension of herself. So Sherry, when Sherry was the Chancellor of UMass Boston, she was the Chancellor. That was her title. But she saw herself as simply playing a particular role in an institution. She saw this institution as a living human being, almost as a person, and that she was a participant in it. And she saw other people that way. And so she saw that also in the Center for Collaborative Leadership. So that when she founded that and when she got involved in that, she really never did feel that she was any less involved in the university as she was when she was the chancellor, because that's the way she saw it. Another thing that made her very, very proud was the work that she did putting together commencement exercises. She loved choosing the people who were getting honorary degrees. But if you think about it, and if you go back, every single solitary one of those people that she presented as a candidate to receive an honorary degree was a person who had made decisions about things in whatever world they lived in, had succeeded sometimes and sometimes not. But they had made a difference. They had changed the world in which they lived because of the strength of their will. I'll mention just two. We got a call once from Porg O'Malley, who was in South Africa. And Porg said, I can get you Rolf Meyer and Cyril Ramaphosa as honorary degree recipients. Cyril Ramaphosa is the current president of South Africa. They were the two people who had written the new constitution for South Africa. He said, I can bring them together to receive honorary degrees, and I have to know right away. The process was, Grace will tell you this, you didn't just choose an honorary degree recipient, you had to propose it to the Board of Trustees and they would have to vote on it. We didn't have time to do that. So Sherry said, yes, get them, and then went through the process. When they left South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa and Rolf Meyer, they couldn't fly on the same plane because one was black and one was white. So they had to fly on separate planes. And they flew to London, and when they got to London, they took one plane to Boston. But I think it was British Airways. British Airways was on strike. And so we had all sorts of difficulty trying to get them to come here. Ted Kennedy, who was another of her heroes, a very, very close friend of Sherry's, and a hero, he arranged a separate plane for them to come. When they got to Logan Airport, they closed down the Southeast Expressway, and he arranged to put them in cars and drive them here and just make the ceremony. When the ceremony was going on, we got the notice that the new constitution in South Africa had been ratified. We got that notice as they were on the stage receiving their honorary degrees. And that was a proud moment for Sherry Penney. Another time, when we were told that we could have las abuelas, the grandmothers from Argentina, to receive honorary degrees, Sherry said yes. We had them, and you know their stories. They are the people who made sure that the children in Argentina were returned to their parents. While we were sitting on the stage, one of those grandmothers was told that her granddaughter had been identified that day. Chancellor, we need to move along. And so I'll say one last thing. Summing up Sherry Penney is a difficult thing to do. And to try to find one word that describes her. I'm going to use some words from A recent favorite author of mine, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who probably history will tell will be one of the greatest theologians of all times. And he says this, and I think this characterizes Sherry. And he talks about piety. First of all, I have to put my glasses on or I won't see it. And he says, the pious person is devoted to a higher aim, the potentiality of a will to serve, to be dedicated to a task which goes beyond our own interests, to live for an ideal. This ideal may be the family, a friend, a group, the nation, or it may be art, science, or social service. In many persons, this will to serve is suppressed, but in the pious person, it blooms and flourishes. In many lives, these ideals seem like blind alleys, but in the pious person, they are thoroughfares. Sherry Penney was a pious woman. May her memory be a blessing. Thank you.
Good morning. I am pleased to be a part of this program, remembering the amazing life of Sherry Penney and her contributions to the Boston region and our nation. In 1995, when I was a senior fellow in the McCormick Institute, I was invited by Ed Toomey to come to the Chancellor's office for a chat. I probably should have known better. He told me that Chancellor Penney wanted to build a more robust urban mission at the university. Out of these discussions, Sherry Penney decided to create a new position, Special Assistant to the Chancellor for Urban Affairs, and she appointed me to the position. I was charged mainly with two tasks. One, make the university's urban mission organic to teaching and learning. And two, launch initiatives that would make the university a more important player in the leadership ranks of Boston in quest of making the city a far better place. After giving me those charges, Sherry went off to become the interim president of the university system. Fortunately, she left Ed Toomey and Jean McCormick, the interim chancellor, to support me in carrying out this urban mission upgrade. One of my first initiatives was to establish the City-to-City program in partnership with the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce and then CEO Paul Guzzi. The program took a diverse group of leaders from nonprofit, for-profit, and governmental sectors to visit other cities in the U.S. and abroad to learn lessons that could be applied to the problems we faced in Boston and how to seize the opportunities present here. At that time, collectively, Boston leaders did not see the benefit of learning from other cities and their leaders. We were mired in historic parochialism. We were satisfied with only drawing on our knowledge located within the borders of the Boston region. Sherry embraced this initiative because she believed, as I did, that to be truly a world-class city, Boston had to learn from other cities. She became an enthusiastic member of the city-to-city delegations that traveled to cities at home and abroad, including Northern Ireland, Barcelona, Vancouver, and China. Our first visit was to Atlanta in 1997, a city that its leaders claimed was, quote, a city too busy to hate. We focused on learning about race relation practices and how Atlanta had used the opportunities afforded by the Summer Olympic Games in 1996 to drive many civic improvements. During the reflection session at Atlanta, Sherry said the following to our group, quote, "We have a problem in Boston because we are not giving our potential young leaders access to circles of influence and power, and helping them to learn how to effectively lead in collaborative ways," end of quote. There was general agreement with her judgment. Then the next year, as our city-to-city group visited Seattle, Sherry said the following, quote, "On our last trip, I said that we have more to do to bring potential young leaders into the leadership ranks in Boston. Well, I'm going to do something about this challenge by establishing a program at UMass Boston." So when Sherry retired as chancellor and moved into the School of Management, she established the Center for Collaborative Leadership and started on the path to create the Emerging Leaders Program, designed to serve a diversity of young leaders and expose them to Boston leaders and have them carry out projects using collaborative means to recommend solutions to problems in the city and report those recommendations directly to the mayor. I was pleased to share with Sherry any experiences I had as special advisor to the Kellogg National Leadership Program for 6 years. It helped her in shaping the Emerging Leaders Program. The results of this program is one of Sherry Penney's greatest legacies to the Boston region. The results of this program: there are 757 alumni who have gone through the program. Now just think about the impact that they have had on transforming the opportunity systems in Boston and helping to make a more collaborative culture here, not to mention helping to shape greater social integration of leaders across the divides of race, ethnicity, gender, and social class. This has been an immense gift to all of us in this city and in this region. Also, the City-to-City program, which she embraced and cherished, created a powerful network of diverse leaders across sectors who collaborated with each other in ways to benefit Boston. Many of them joined each other's boards. As a woman, as you heard this day, as a woman who broke barriers, glass ceilings in academia, Sherry embraced the awesome responsibility to help other women do the same. She was all about breaking barriers created by racism and sexism, using her power as a manager in the academy to forge progress. Her rise in academia, all the way to the top of the university system in Massachusetts, was a model for others, and she rightfully took pride in her success. Sherry was a historian, and don't forget it. She brought her knowledge of history and historical insights to her leadership roles. She taught me that non-historical leadership or ahistorical leadership is grossly inadequate because you are likely to make the same old mistakes over again. I treasure that wisdom, and I have profited from it. Historical breakthroughs were always on her mind. The last time I saw Sherry, we were together about a year ago in October 2018 on a panel at a breakfast program of the Emerging Leaders Program. We received awards together with George Russell. As I said goodbye to her, she had a glint in her eye and enthusiasm in her voice as she shared with me her excitement about the possibility that Andrew Gillum, the African-American leader running for governor of Florida, would win. She was thrilled about the real possibility of now living in the southern state of Florida and being a part of such a breakthrough. Unfortunately, it did not happen, not yet. But that was vintage Sherry, rooting for a historical breakthrough. I did not know that the goodbye that morning would be the last time I would see Sherry. It is utterly tragic that a cruel accident has taken her and Jim Livingston, her husband, away from us. However, I stand here this morning awfully glad that she came my way, and I am a much better person because of her sterling example and her friendship. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all of our speakers this morning for making Sherry so real to us, especially those of us who didn't have as long an acquaintance with her. It's appropriate now that we end our ceremony by receiving some words from the family, and so I'm particularly honored to introduce Sherry's son, Michael Penney. Michael is the global head of technology for the Coactive Training Institute, the largest in-person coach training and leadership training organization in the world. I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone here that he specializes in leadership training. He lives in Sarasota, Florida with his wife and 2 children. Michael, welcome back to UMass Boston, and thank you for representing your family as we honor your mother.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming and honoring my mom. This means, it means a lot to everyone, so thank you. I've been coming to this campus for so long. I was in my 20s, Mom started, and now I'm a little bit older. But I was 36 when she retired as chancellor. But she wasn't good at retiring, and as we talked, she founded the Center for Collaborative Leadership and continued right on. Some things I'd like to share that maybe some of you know and some don't about Mom and her personal life. She was born premature, a cesarean birth, and in 1937 in Marlette, Michigan, that was an emergency. She wrote a full biography, longhand, on her 21st birthday of her first 20 years of life. And she relates how she spent her first weeks in the hospital while her mother, Jean, was also recuperating separately from the birth. And you remember Mom, and Jean was another 5 inches shorter. And she noted that it took Jean 6 months to recover, and her father, Terry, who was a school administrator, would visit every day in the hospital, but he could only look at Mom. He couldn't touch her until sometime after she was born. She loved Marlette, Michigan, where she lived across the street from her cousins and played every day. Later, her father was offered the position of superintendent in the Elkhorn School District in Michigan. And when Terry accepted the position, the school board wanted to meet the family. My mom, and she would have been about 12, told the head of the school board that she hated Elkhorn and would never like living there unless her cousins moved there as well. She was a firecracker even back then. My mom started out teaching history, and like our Senator Warren, she had to stop teaching when she was pregnant with me. When she started to show. It was my fault. And that led her to her go on to PhD and become a university. And we know the story about at SUNY Albany when she was told that she couldn't continue. Another thing I'd like to share is a quote from her article called Inclusive Leadership. And this story would have been in the early 70s, about 71, 72. There's a quote from her. "My first university teaching position was at Union College in Schenectady, New York, where I was asked to develop courses in women's history, which I would teach along with my courses in 19th century reform, Jacksonian America, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. The students in my women's history course were both male and female, as Union had just recently gone co-ed, and many remarked at the end of the course they were surprised to have learned so much that was new. Issues relevant to women in history had not been covered elsewhere in their education. They were particularly impressed with the struggle in July 1838 when 5 brave women had organized in Seneca Falls, New York, the first women's rights convention, and paraphrased the Declaration of Independence, declaring that all men and women are created equal." And she went on to say, "This was quite a revolutionary statement for its time. My students were surprised at the number of demands made by these women from another era who saw inequality everywhere and demanded the right for women to control their own property and wages, have education to jobs and education, and have the right to vote. The 5 women who organized the convention were all mothers who believed that giving women their equal rights would not only be better for women, but also for men, for we were all women's children." End quote. And of course, one of these 5 women at Seneca Falls was Jim's great-great-great-grandmother, Martha Coffin Wright. They were really just meant to be together. With my son, Alex, Mom was wonderful. She brought him blocks, dinosaurs, and Legos to play with at her house, and was delighted one day when he built a tower in her living room, and they found a place in the tower for every one of the dinosaurs, because every dinosaur needs a home. My mom, like I said, didn't retire very well, so she continued to teach around the Sarasota area at the adult education centers, and she brought my daughter, Alana, who's 16, to many of her classes and lectures in the Sarasota area. I'm so glad that Alana was able to see Mom in her element, teaching the history of America and women's rights to an adoring audience. Her most popular lecture in the Sarasota area was Seneca Falls to Me Too, where she traced the history of the Seneca Falls to the Me Too movement. And that was the presentation she made at the International Women's Forum in Sarasota the night she passed. My family, my children, we all struggle to find words for the tragedy, but there are really no words. And I'm here because I want this story told about the senseless, random tragedy of their deaths, along with the beauty of their lives, because their deaths were easily preventable. When they returned from the presentation, they went inside, and the keyless Toyota Avalon that they were driving continued to run and filled up their condominium with carbon monoxide. And carbon monoxide is a colorless and odorless gas. You can't smell it, you can't see it. It just basically puts you to sleep. Since that day, we've found many other stories of people who have been killed by their keyless cars. We found that although more people have been killed by Toyota's keyless ignition than any other car maker, and the first person killed by a keyless ignition car was a Toyota. And more than 37 people have died this way since 2005. And just for some context, the exploding airbags, it's about twice as many people, more than twice as many people from the keyless cars than the exploding airbags. So with an inexpensive and readily available auto stop switch, the type that GM and Ford have installed, the car would have shut itself off 30 minutes after being left on. So Mom and Jim died of Toyota's indifference. The fact that the keyless cars will just keep running until they run out of gas or oxygen is something that the National Transportation Safety Board has known about since keyless ignitions were introduced. Other car manufacturers have also failed to install the fix, and the NTSB has failed to institute regulations proposed in 2011 to prevent more such deaths from occurring. Back at the registration table, I have some sample letters. At heart, Mom was an activist, and I'm going to ask all of you to take some action today. There's a sample letter with the bill that has been introduced by Representative Janet Schakowsky, Senator Blumenthal in the Senate, called the Park Act. Currently, we don't have any GOP senators. If anybody knows Mitch, please see if we can get him to bring it up. But with all the big things going on in government today, an act like this that would have saved my mother seemed like a small thing. But as a technologist, I see how rapidly our technology has outstripped the rules we live by. As we move into dealing with self-driving, connected and vehicles and other innovations, we need to have an increased focus on the impacts that technology has as active participants in this great experiment of democracy. I just want to close with the reading. Mom and Jim were regulars at the Unitarian Church. From the one in Schenectady, New York, where Jim was my Sunday school teacher, to the church in Saratoga, where they were married, to the churches in Hingham, Massachusetts, and Sarasota, Florida, where they were regulars. So this is a reading from the Unitarian practice. Lighting a candle is somewhat like the beginning of a life. If that is true, then perhaps extinguishing a candle is like the ending of a life. But death may not be the end of us. We live on in the memories of friends and loved ones. The influence we possessed in life works on, moving persons or causes forward. Let us not forget that most candles have more than one life, and so, perhaps, may we. Thank you all. Thank you for coming.
Well, I can't think of any more fitting note to end on than signing a petition. It's certainly what Sherry Penney would have wanted all of us to do. So I'm going to thank all of you for coming this morning and direct you to the table where you can find the letters that you should sign on her behalf. Thank you, everyone, for coming to remember this remarkable person. Good morning.